And Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea with the great and glorious rod which was created at the beginning, and on which were engraven and set forth the great and glorious name, and the 10 signs which had smitten the Mizraim, and the 3 fathers of the world, and the 6 mothers, and the 12 tribes of Jacob. And straightway Yahuwah brought a vehement east wind upon the sea all night, and made the sea dry, and divided the waters into 12 divisions according to the 12 tribes of Jacob. And the children of Israel went through the midst of the sea upon the ground, and the waters were congealed like a wall, 300 miles on the right hand and on their left. And the Mizraim followed and went in after them, all the horses of Pharaoh and his chariots and horsemen, into the midst of the sea. And it was that, in the morning watch, at the time that the powers on high come to offer praise, Yahuwah looked forth with anger upon the host of the Mizraim from the column of fire, to hurl upon them flakes of fire and hail, and from the column of cloud, and confounded the host of the Mizraim. And he brake the wheels of Pharaoh's carriages, so that they drave them with hardship, and that they went on and left them behind. And the Mizraim said to one another, Let us flee from the people of the house of Israel, for this is the word of Yahuwah, who fought for them in Mizraim. That footage there was from Cecil B. DeMille, and a lot of people know of the 10 Commandments movie that had Charlton Heston in it, but that was actually a remake. A lot of people don't know that Cecil B. DeMille did a silent film like 30 years earlier, and that was kind of fun, taking clips from that silent film and editing them together. The audio was kind of a flashback, because a lot of you might be a little jarring for some of you, back when I used to say phonetically Yahuwah instead of Yahweh or Yahweh. And so that was actually back when I recorded Exodus from the Aramaic Targum like 5 years ago or something like that. But anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. So last week we talked about the Reptilians. That was a conversation we had. I finally went there after wanting to, I said it was in my stack. I wanted to cover that. And I said at the time that it would be at least a 2-part study. And I felt a little bad because I had all this information on the Reptilians and I didn't really give you guys like any scriptural references, because it kind of got, pushed into the second half of it, which is what we're going to cover tonight. So tonight is dragons. And of course, what if I told you that the Reptilians and the dragons are the same, and that they are the Seraphim angels that we find in the Bible? So dragons are legitimate, and hopefully my goal is for some of you, someone's going to watch this today, tonight, whatever time of the day you're watching this, wherever you are on this motionless plane, and you're going to walk away going, wow, dragons were historically legit. So we're going to be starting out looking at some medieval artwork, comparing it to Renaissance artwork. And if you're a part of my Discord group, I actually was just talking about this, how in 2 months' time, I'm getting ready to set sail, and I will be in Europe for about 7 months. And I'm going to be doing a big investigation there through the UK and through the EU. And I want to go up to these Gothic cathedrals and castles and touch them with my own hands. And I want to compare between the early and late Middle Ages. It'll be probably more late Middle Ages with Renaissance. and just see the differences, as we're kind of comparing like what we call, for lack of a better word or phrase, Tartarian society versus what I believe is the Millennial Kingdom, the Dark Ages. And these pictures right here, I did a talk on this. These I took myself. These were from the Smithsonian. I took my sons on a field trip to Washington, D.C. last autumn. And we spent a week going through the Smithsonian and, ingesting the propaganda there. There was a lot of it, still very fascinating stuff. And to my absolute delight, I mean, I had no clue that in the art museum there, that I was thinking to be like a lot of American artwork. I had no clue that they just had this some of the best medieval artwork I've ever seen in my life. Let's just say I was in the kingdom of heaven. I particularly was in love with this wood carving of this elfish looking, it's got like a green man breastplate with like the Lion of Judah on there. I mean, I'd like to make that into a lamp or something like that. You see St. George over here, which is the topic. I covered that again last week. St. George slaying the dragon. A lot of really awesome stuff like that. The Lady and the Unicorn, I've covered that. I've covered, it looks like Mary Magdalene to me there in the center. As well as I saw a lot of like wood carvings of these angelic, they were angels. And you see a lot of that in medieval artwork where they're depicting angels just hanging out with real mortal people on this earth, which I always find really fascinating as well. So you can expect a lot of that this next year. My goal is to give you whole presentations as I'm going through these, through Europe and investigating this stuff. And so one of the things, I just take a minute and look at this medieval artwork. A lot of these will be like wood plates or whatever. A lot of them, haven't survived through the years due to bad conditions or being destroyed. But what is something that you guys see here? This is one of my all-time favorites. I mean, this is just gloriously beautiful here with this Gothic architecture and these steeples and cathedrals in the background with all these saints here gathered together with the angels all worshiping the Lamb. So look at these here. Here's another one of my favorites with a scene from Paradise where you see royalty, with divine kind of angelic creatures with children and so on and so forth. Here's a lady in the unicorn with the Lion of Judah in a scene that looks like it takes place in Paradise. And but then, so this is actually from a paper I wrote. I'm going to be reading a little bit of this to you tonight. And medieval art was intended to teach morality lessons using scripture as its peripheral vision, all of which directed the soul towards a heavenly pilgrimage, whereas the Renaissance gloried in the individual. And of course, this is Art 101 stuff. Any art class are going to teach you this, the huge distinctive difference between medieval artwork versus Renaissance artwork. And the pilgrimage was one of the defining qualities of the early and late Middle Ages. All the history books will tell you this. It was defined by the pilgrimage. That's what all of their artwork is geared towards a heavenly pilgrimage, which takes us right back to Sukkot. That's the whole thing about Sukkot. And the number one defining element of the millennial kingdom that we get in the Bible is Sukkot. We know that the individuals or the nations that did not celebrate Sukkot would be cursed. So I find that really interesting. Now, humanism can be defined as an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to the human individual rather than the divine or supernatural. So we could say that Renaissance artwork, which I'll show you some examples in a second, were more geared towards humanism. Another word deriving from the Renaissance is individualism, another kind of branch out word from humanism, which, as you can deduce, stresses the philosophical role of each person within the hieroglyph, the kind of the divine within. And then we have propagandists of the Enlightenment period of Francisco, Petrarch, Leonardo da Vinci, Dante. Actually, Dante, I don't know, maybe that's not fair to put him in there. I mean, whether he was a propagandist or not. But particularly Leonardo da Vinci and some of the others had a heavy hand in classifying the medieval period as slow and dark. Now, that's the official narrative, right? So whether they, believe that or not, historically, I don't really know. I wasn't there. But they wanted to paint the Middle Ages as dark, right? The Dark Ages instead of the Age of Enlightenment. And so right here, we see this is Enlightenment artwork. Now, you see a radical shift here, right? With medieval artwork, it's giving you pictures of angels, saints, demons, and trying to give you morality lessons of how you're to gear your life to live a life that is directed towards righteous living, and giving you good examples in Scripture. With Renaissance art, all of a sudden they are glorifying the individual. They're not glorifying Allah Hayam. And of course, some of the brilliant propaganda that they were putting into their artwork is they would combine Christian biblical images with very pagan occult. You'd see a lot of that in the Enlightenment, where they were putting these pagan gods right next to Christian gods. And so putting side by side here, what do you see? All right. So over here on the left, you see medieval imagery. You see evil angels as well as unclean spirits. They were often depicted as serpentine dragons or gargoyle-like creatures during the Middle Ages. Then as soon as you get to the Renaissance, all of a sudden the artists gave these fallen angels buns of steel and chabangas, right? So what's going on? I mean, huge difference here. All of a sudden, Satan is no longer a serpentine creature. He's really just chiseled, and he's got abs of steel and this kind of stuff, right? And so what I want to talk to you tonight is about, let me just read this here. I want to show you about the way our brain operates and what might be going on here. There have ever only been two dominant transmitter devices for the spread of paranormal perception on this side of the spiritual curtain. So think about this. Words, like right now you can see the words on the screen, words and images working together. Here are words and images, right? I am showing you a perception of the spiritual world, which is correct. The dragons over here on the left, or these chiseled abs as steel over here on the right, which is the correct perception of the spiritual world. Now, I've just described the human brain for you. The left side of our brain handles reading, writing, and calculations in our day-to-day, and is referred to as the brains of the operation, where logic is concerned. So the left side of our brain is logic. The right side is visual, dealing more often than not in images, the images behind our artistic endeavor. So, and this is where the spidey sense comes from. The spidey sense can come from the right side, not necessarily the logical side. And this is a problem with a lot of paranoid individuals, is that they maybe start losing maybe the front lobe or the left side of their brain. They start losing those functions. And believe it or not, all of us deal in our imagination with paranoia. Even the most logical stoic thinkers have kind of these paranoid thoughts, but or what you could call the spidey sense. But the difference is that we have the logical side, which can kind of make sense of everything and kind of push our fears aside. But then you see the people, and they lose that logical side, and they get bogged down in the always afraid of whatever, it can get really bad, right? A paranoid person. So how the spiritual realm materializes within our mind's eye is based largely, I'm putting forward the position. I wrote this paper originally back in 2017, long time ago. I was really interested in this idea of what if a lot of our perception of the spiritual world is based on our mind's eye, which is on art, on visual images. All right. So let me put it this way. You can see in the Middle Ages where the spiritual world, they paint. Do I need to go over all those pictures again? They paint good angels kind of looking very almost human, and they have the beautiful wings on the back, right? But then the demons, the gargoyles, and they show dragons, and then it changes in the Renaissance. But then something else started happening. We have this right here. Right, we have the alien greens. Now, the greens, the grays, the reptilians, which hopefully you all understand by this point that the reptilians are the dragons of old, right? But what I'm saying is that we have there's a lot of different, conspiratorial ideas and good research on that these greens or grays. People don't really talk about the greens anymore. It's more the alien grays that they, those are like biological suits, and that there's like a spirit will embody it, stuff like that. But I have put forward the position: what if when we, because I've seen, I told you last week, I have seen a reptilian, and I have encountered a gray as well. I have seen a gray. The gray has talked to me. This was like a decade ago. It was not a pleasant experience, a very evil entity. But even it kind of caused me to kind of search this matter out and go like, what if that's not really what he looks like? What if the only reason that I see him as a gray is because of artwork, meaning that the occult needs pop culture in order to identify for me what I am seeing from a multi-dimensional creature trying to come into the third dimension. Hopefully you guys are following. So the earliest reference that I can find personally to these greens, these, men from Mars that are green, comes from Washington Irving. Interestingly enough, he's going back to like 1809. So this is kind of reset territory, mud flood, release of the Watchers, Satan, short season stuff, right? And then Edgar Rice Burroughs, this is the Tarzan guy. He also did the Princess of Mars. He did that whole Mars series. He starts describing them as well as the green people. And they were described as 10 to 12 feet tall. This is around 1912. And so you start to see it developing in pop culture. Before this, we don't see little green men in the 1700s or in the Renaissance or the Middle Ages as before. Is it because they just scrubbed it all and reintroduced it? Or is it because it's something that's actually developing within pop culture that then materializes? I don't have the answers for you, but this it's kind of the way I think generally. So folklore researcher Chris Aubeck found that the little green men began cropping up in the media starting at the turn of the 20th century. And one notable mention derives from the Atlanta Constitution in 1899, whereas green-skinned aliens inhabited a planet called Hera. And in the following decades, Hollywood and the comic book industry basically went ape crazy over the secondary color, making a craze out of it. And what do you think came of it? People began seeing these. Now, this is, of course, Barney and Betty Hill. Before I get to them, let me just read this here. So what I do question is my own ability to accurately translate a higher dimensional being having pierced through the spiritual curtain which divides us and then broken down for somebody like me, incapable of recognizing shapes and forms beyond the third dimension. Chuck Missler back in the day, in the 90s, he was talking about this. He was like, look, all those UFOs you're seeing. Now, Chuck Missler, interestingly enough, he didn't have, I don't think, a popular opinion, probably to this day, because he didn't think they were all bad. And I agree. I think that when we see a lot of these like UFO technology up there, it could belong to good agents and bad agents. We really don't know offhand. But he would be saying that these are like multi-dimensional ships or transport devices coming into our dimension, and that our eyes are we're trying to break something very complex down, and that what we see is not necessarily what it truly looks like. I believe that. I think that's true. So pop culture in league with the media created the alien phenomenon, meaning that these spiritual entities already existed. They've already been here long before, but back in the day, they looked different than they do now. And only then did they begin to materialize within the public consciousness. So here we have Barney and Betty Hill. This is, of course, not really them. That looks like James Earl Jones. Maybe that is James Earl Jones. I don't really know. This is obviously a couple actors playing them in some sort of TV movie from like the 70s or something, or the 80s, or whenever they filmed this. And it started in September 19th, 1961. They were alien abductees, and they described these little men. I don't know if they were green or gray. And interestingly enough, it opened up the floodgates of abduction stories to follow. Last week, I told you about the police officer that encountered a reptilian creature. That came after Barney and Betty Hill. When Barney and Betty Hill talked about their abduction, eventually they lived a very hard life afterwards. I think they eventually divorced. live separate lives. But we go from 1961 to like the explosion of the X-Files in the 90s, where the UFO abduction stories became like a subculture within itself. It all started with Barney and Betty Hill. And of course, before that time, these things weren't happening, and then they did. And I like to point out that I think, you have stories like this in the 1950s happening. It happened first in pop culture. Isn't that interesting? We could all discuss how much of pop culture is led by intel versus the spiritual world. They're both having a hand in this. But it's interesting that it begins first with pop culture. So there's a interesting story. I'm going to probably botch this, but there's an interesting story from, what was his name? Was it Jack Kirby? No, I'm going to talk about Jack Kirby here. It was an illustrator for the Planet of the Apes comic book. This is like in the 70s or 80s. And he's, of course, I think it's in the 70s. Of course, the original movies came out in the late 60s. And he's illustrating these comic books of the Planet of the Apes. And he had this experience where he's drawing an ape on the page. And then he hears his wife scream, and he goes in the other room, and he sees that his wife is being held hostage by one of the apes he just drew. And it really bothered him, because he's like, how in the world did that get manifested from the page into reality, where it seemed to be this real spiritual entity that he was perceiving as the very character he just drew. All right. So again, I will ask, how does that happen? I'll let you guys decide. You guys can discuss as a class. Now, pop culture icon Jack Kirby created his fair share of quote unquote real world manifestations. The most popular of which is the face on Mars. Now, this has been, I think, disproven by this point. Maybe not. I don't really know. I remember when I was a child, everyone was talking about the face on Mars. Jack Kirby first drew it, and then suddenly NASA takes a photo of it. All right. So it was in 1976, the Viking compositing image, whatever, that it's a NASA thing, whatever. So another Jack Kirby thing, it's actually called the Kirby effect. Jack Kirby has put this into pop culture so much, and it then became real. It is literally called the Kirby effect, similar to kind of the Mandela effect. So in his, I guess it's OMAC one-man army series, I've never read it for myself, but Kirby depicted an evil dictator named Kafka, who was arrested in an underground bunker and then put on trial for a series of crimes, conveniently replicating those of the Iraqi leader, if you remember, Saddam Hussein. He also, it's like creepy how close they are on so many things too. There was another account, whatever. I don't know what his other account is, but let's talk about the Seraphim angels and how they are dragons, and how I'm just going to give the case tonight that the dragons, there might have been a physical reality to them, but I think that when we're looking at a lot of this medieval artwork, they're talking about something a little bit more spiritual and esoteric, kind of like when you finally realize that St. George didn't really spear an actual dragon. I know that's put forward by a lot of young earth creationists, but when you look at the earliest accounts, the dragon was it was embodying the man that he killed. He's actually slaying a man, and he's killing a reptilian within. And so they're giving you a, kind of a more of an esoteric message, right? And I'm of the opinion that the medieval artists were getting it closer right than we see at any other time. So let's talk about Enoch and the Dragons. Why do I have a picture here from Raiders of the Lost Ark? Of course, my dreams are crushed of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just had Andrew Hoy on last night, a wonderful individual, love him to death. And he's done a lot of research on how the tabernacle in the wilderness was domed, kind of like a big yurt, circular if you'd like, and three-dimensional domed circular object. And of course, it was modeled after heaven, like the firmament, the big dome. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant would have also been, according to the same logic, the same deductive reasoning, it would have been circular as well. So it kind of, it crushes those of us who were big, Indiana Jones fan. It's like, that's not the Ark of the Covenant. Sorry, dude. But anyways, you remember they opened it up and the angel came out and melted all their faces. Really just awesome, badass scene. Some of you are rolling your eyes. Some of the women, maybe more delicate women, do not appreciate that. But I'm going to show you, the reason I'm showing you this picture, because it's actually the same account happened with Enoch. I'm going to read you from Yasher first. Just so you guys know, here at TUC, we just put out a restored names edition of Jasher in the Paleo. So that's really exciting. You guys can pick that up in our store. This is what it says. And when the kings returned, they caused a census to be taken in order to know the number of remaining men that went with Enoch. So Enoch, just quick context here. Enoch is knowing he knows he's about to leave and go to heaven permanently. He's already been there. He did his whole thing with the Watchers and all that kind of stuff, but he's leaving now. He's not coming back, at least not in their lifetime. And all these people want to go with him. And he's warning him. He's like, you guys, you're going to die. Like, if you don't follow me, you're not going to make it if you do. So, and it was upon the seventh day that Enoch ascended into heaven in a whirlwind with horses and chariots of fire. Now, it connects us to Elijah or Eliyahu, who also went up in a chariot of fire. I never noticed that before. The seventh day. That's kind of an interesting thought. And on the eighth day, all the kings that had been with Enoch sent to bring back the number of men that were with Enoch in that place from which he ascended into heaven. And all those kings went to the place, and they found the earth there filled with snow. And upon the snow were large stones of snow. And one said to the other, "Come, let us break through the snow and see. Perhaps the men that remained with Enoch are dead." Anyways, they don't find Enoch. He's gone. The snow is kind of interesting. That little side breadcrumb trail I don't intend to go down tonight, but it is interesting that in heaven you see both fire and ice, and you see the same thing in the underworld, with not so much in Sheol, maybe more like Coptic kind of apocalypse versions of hell, but they have this idea of the judgment having both fire and ice. Kind of interesting here. So here you see he's going up in fire, and there's ice behind. Just kind of interesting thought there. So let's keep reading. I showed you that first from Jasher. Now we're going to read from the Book of the Two Pearls, or this is a section called The Accounts of Enoch. The Book of the Two Pearls, chapter 1, verse, or I guess 14. I don't know why I put 4, but this is from chapter 1. Enoch was shown a vision of the coming deluge. Yahweh has said, "My servant Enoch, you must warn the wicked generation that I intend to keep my promise. I will destroy every creation in the land, for they have corrupted all that I have made." And Enoch asked, "Who will survive?" Yahweh, Elohim, said, I have a chosen vessel that will carry on the pure seed of righteousness. He's speaking of Noah and the ark. "You will be taken before this great destruction comes. Warn the infidels." And Enoch went out to the multitude and said, "Behold, the Yahweh is coming with 10,000 of his holy ones to mete out judgment to all those who are ungodly. You have sinned a grievous sin and forgotten the creator of the world." And this is what I want you to see right here. After he said this, the multitude took up arms to kill him. Isn't that amazing? Like, just you tell people like the righteous judges, like to live a righteous life, and the crowd quickly turns. There's no end to that even today. Anyway, suddenly a whirlwind came from heaven as a storm of fire. And within the whirlwind of fire were Seraphim, dragons of the power of Elohim. All who saw this became blind in that moment, for their eyes were burned from their sockets. This is why I showed you Raiders of the Lost Ark, because it's like the same scene at the end. It's pretty badass. So there it is right there. It's telling you, I mean, it's great. They're telling you that the Seraphim angels are dragons. And so we could deduce from this, these were good dragons, by the way, right? So we could deduce from this that there are good dragons and there's bad dragons. There's the reptilians. Now, generally, you're gonna talk about the reptilians. You're gonna put them in a negative light. I'm gonna show you kind of a duality coming up, where you're gonna see a good reptilian right next to an evil reptilian, and that comes from Amram in the vision of the Watchers. So quickly, who was Amram? And the text I'm going to show you actually comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So reading from Jasher or Yasher really quickly, Yasher 67, there was a man in the land of Mitzrayim, that's Egypt, of the seed of Levi or Lawaya, whose name was Amram, the son of Kuhath, the son of Lawaya or Levi, the son of Yasharel. Of course, Yasharel is Jacob, Yaakov. And this man went and took a woman named Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, his father's sister, and she was 126 years old. And he came unto her. She had her first child at 126 years old. And the woman conceived and bore a daughter, and she called her name Miriam, because in those days the Mitzrayim had embittered the lives of the children of Yasharel. We always think of Mary as like what a cute name, and it is. It's a beautiful name, but it means like bitterness. That the people are embittered. So it's kind of interesting that you see a lot of Miriams again in the first century under Rome. I mean, Yahushua was like surrounded by Marys, right? There was a lot of, naming your child after bitterness. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Aaron. And of course, we know about Moshe afterwards. Now, what happened is that Amram was on a mission to bury I think it was one of the patriarchs. And I can't tell you offhand which patriarch it was, but we know that Joseph and his 11 brothers, as each one of them died, Joseph was the only one that was buried and embalmed and remained in Egypt, and he did not leave until the Exodus. But the other 11 brothers, as each one of them died, their sons or grandsons or great-grandchildren, they would go back to Canaan. They would get permission to go back there and bury them in the cave in Hebron. So unfortunately for Amram, what happened was, of course, this is all backstory, a war broke out between Canaan, I think it was the Philistines, and Egypt, and they shut the border down. And he's in Canaan when it happened. He was separated from his wife for it was some ginormous number, like a couple decades, like 20, 30 years or something like that. I mean, I don't even know if they were getting letters through, and his wife is like, well, maybe my husband's dead. She doesn't really know. So this scene happens while he's in Canaan. This is what he said, what he wrote in his testimony that I believe this comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I saw watchers in my vision. So we were talking about the same angelic creatures that are dealing with the book of Enoch, Genesis 6. I saw watchers in my vision, the dream vision. So he's seeing it like through his third eye. He's seeing a vision of these creatures. Two men were fighting over me, and they were holding a great contest over me. I asked them, who are you that you are thus empowered over me? And they answered me, we have been empowered and rule over all mankind. Okay. And I'm telling you right now that there's a good one and an evil one. So they said to me, which of us do you choose to rule you? That's an interesting thought. And I raised my eyes and looked, and one of them was terrifying in his appearance, like a serpent. His cloak many-colored, yet very dark. And I looked again, and and I'm assuming this is maybe the second watcher. He says, in his appearance, his visage was like a viper, and wearing ... exceedingly in all his eyes. We don't really all know what it says right there. And I replied to him, so he's talking, I think, to the second one that looked like a viper. He says, this watcher, who is he? He's looking at the terrifying one. And the one that wasn't terrifying he answered me, this watcher, his three names are Belial and Prince of Darkness and King of Evil. And I said, my Lord, what dominion? And his every way is darkened, his every work darkened. In darkness, They weren't able to translate all this, but you saw, and he is empowered over all darkness, while I am empowered over all light. There's some checkerboard duality right there. The angel of light versus angel of darkness. From the highest regions to the lowest, I rule over all light, and over all that is of Allah Hayam. I rule over every man of his grace and shalom. Over all the sons of light have I been empowered. And I asked him, what are your names? And he said, my three names are Michael and Prince of Light and King of Righteousness. So it's kind of interesting here to see Michael as a watcher. He's described in terms of a watcher. And if the lines of this text are, correct, it appears that they're both serpentine creatures. It's the duality. They're both types of kind of like reptilians, and one is good and one is evil. So we can literally say here that Belial, he's described as a dragon, the serpent of old, right? This is why he seems to me not to be a cherubim, but a seraphim angel. So this is interesting right here. Now, this was written recently, December of 2024. And I dug this article up in my research for this week. And it says a mysterious snake person head from 7,500 years ago raises questions. Now we can all, talk about how they date these things. I mean, it's kind of like the way it works, like with jars, for example, is there'll be some archaeologists to say this jar from this city in Turkey, I am dating this to be 5,000 years old, or 3,000 or whatever, right? And so if they dig up jars in the city of Jericho or whatever, if they look and they determine to be the same type of jars they found in Turkey or whatever, it's a cyclical process where that's how they date a lot of this stuff. Now, some people, I could be wrong about that, but for what I've looked into, it's a little kind of maddening how they determine these dates. There's nothing, they're not putting them through some machine and the machine's like, oh, this is exactly, this old. So maybe they are 7,500 years old, maybe 20,000, maybe 2,000, or 3,000, whatever. I don't really know. But how creepy is this? A figurine head uncovered in Kuwait. Excavations by the Kuwait Polish Archaeological Mission at a site in northern Kuwait's Al Subaya Desert have uncovered a bizarre-looking clay head representative of the culture of a prehistoric people who flourished in the region between 5,500 and 4,900 BC. Could be true. Could be pre-diluvian, right? This could be pre-flood. With an elongated skull, so there you have we're connecting the long skulls with a reptilian, a flat nose, because they were snake-like, just as we saw in Amram's vision. An absent mouth. Isn't that interesting? Because they speak telepathically. It's the same thing with the alien grays, right? Like they don't actually speak through their mouth. And narrow, squinting eyes. The small sculpture looks well on the way to becoming another example of a snake person figurine commonly crafted by that culture. So here's some very well-endowed feminine reptilian creatures. Apparently they weren't all men. There were some women. They have elongated skulls. They look like a viper in the face. As you can see, well endowed. And they're kind of greenish too. Kind of just creepy stuff. And look at this. It's the Madonna. It's woof. There's your Madonna and child right there, going back to the reptilians, celebrating this baby being born. And this was found near ancient Ur. In these mass graves that, takes us back to the dawn of civilization. Is this what the Anunnaki looked like? I've seen research that paint the Anunnaki commonly with bird feathers, but I've also seen reptilians, and I'm kind of wondering if that's where the whole dinosaur narrative is going, because, all of a sudden they're all getting bird feathers, they're like taking flight. They didn't used to, right? They used to be these just reptile creatures, and now they're all becoming birds. But I've seen both with the Anunnaki, so just something to look out for. Here's a couple more. I think that's a male and a female side by side. It looks like the male unfortunately had his chiseled off through the years, and the woman is pointing to you how womanly she is. They've got the cone heads and the reptilian faces. So let's talk a little bit about the seraphim in the wilderness, and let's look at some biblical passages. I'm going to show you that the serpents in the wilderness, even though they're often depicted as snakes, you actually see here they're depicted as basilisks, and that these appear to be there seems to be some sort of connection between the basilisk and the seraphim angels. So this comes from Numbers 21:6 in the Aramaic Targum. And the people thought wickedly in their heart and talked against the word of Yahweh, and contended with Moshe, saying, "Why did thou bring us up from Mizraim to die in the wilderness? For there is neither bread nor water, and our soul is weary of manna, this light food. And the bath coal fell from high heaven. Now, the bath coal would be a feminine voice that is depicted as a dove. And so we see the bath coal. Actually, I pointed out multiple times in the New Testament. One was at the baptism of Messiah. Another time in Revelation, come out of her, my people. The bath coal, of course, would be the mother, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. The bath coal fell from high heaven and thus spake, come all men and see all the benefits which I have done to the people whom I brought up free out of Egypt, out of Mizraim. I made manna come down for them from heaven, yet now turn they and murmur against me. So, I mean, imagine this, your mother feeds you, right? She's like, look, I feed you and you just complain all the time. What's for dinner? What's for dinner? You're never happy. Yet behold the serpent, whom in the days of the beginning of the world I doomed to have dust for his food, hath not murmured against me. So the very serpent, remember the curse at Genesis 3. They are now, I don't have maybe I'll do a study on this in the coming weeks, but they lost their wings. The serpent was a type of basilisk creature, lost the wings. They have to now slither on the food, on the ground and, eat the dust. It hasn't murmured. But my people are murmuring about their food, the manna, the manna sounded amazing. The food of heaven. Now shall the serpents who have not complained of their food come and bite the people who complain. Therefore did the word of Yahweh send the basilisk serpents. How did I not highlight that right there? So it literally says in the Numbers Targum, basilisk. And they bit the people, and a great multitude of the people of Yasharel died. So there is a connection right there between the basilisk and the serpents, the serpent from Eden. Numbers 21:6. So this is the paleo version. This is Pamela's version. That we are, of course, translating the whole Bible through the paleo. And Yahweh the ever living sit among the people the burning poisonous that nakasheon, that like nakash, like a serpent, and they bit the people, and a great many people from Yasharel died. And the people came toward Al-Mashah and declared, we have erred, and we have set forth words against Yahuwah, the ever-living, and against you. Intervene towards Yahuwah, that he will turn aside from over us the Af ha-Nakash. And Mashah intervened for the people, and Yahuwah, the ever-living, declared toward Al-Mashah, fashion for yourself a seraph. There it is right there. A place, and place him upon a standard. And this, of course, takes us up to John chapter 3, even as Moses lifted up the serpents in the wilderness. But here it's saying that it's a serpent, but it was a seraphim angel that was depicted on there as they lifted it up. This is from the Torah.com. This is what they say, the way they define Numbers 21:6. Yahweh sent serpents against the people. So now it's connecting clearly the Nakash or the basilisk we saw in the Targum with seraphim serpents. They are literally angels. These are dragons that are coming through, like spiritual entities that are coming through biting people. So whether or not they saw them, whether or not they manifested, or how they saw them in their mind's eye is up to anybody's guess. They may have not seen them. They could have just been, just kind of invisibly going along and biting people. They bit the people and many of the Israelites died. Again, I wasn't there, so I don't know. It's how do you interpret this, right? I mean, if I were to make this into a movie, how would I, as a fallible man, interpret that to look? The people came to Moses and said, we sin by speaking against Yahuwah and against you. Intercede with Yahuwah to take away the serpents from us. And Moses interceded for the people. And then it concludes in Numbers 21:8. Then Yahuwah said to Moses, make a seraph figure. So again, the same type of creature that was biting them and killing them, they put that on the pole. Ecclesiastes 10:11, recounting the same scene. This is from the Aramaic Targum. It says, when seraphim snakes are stirred up to bite and to cause harm in the world. So it's interesting. Earlier enough, the Targum said in Numbers that they were basilisks. Now it's saying they're seraphim. So when seraphim snakes are stirred up to bite and to cause harm in the world, it is on account of the sins of Yasharel, who do not engage in the words of the Torah quietly. And also there is no advantage for a slanderer who speaks with a third tongue, for he will be burned in the fire of Gehenna. That last line isn't really what I want to show you. But this actually connects perfectly with Genesis 3:15. And this is the promise of the prophecy of the biting of the heel and stepping on the head. And we read this: and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between the seed of thy son and the seed of her sons. I'll talk more about that when we finally get into serpent seed. And it shall be, when the sons of the woman keep the commandments of the Torah, they will be prepared to smite thee upon thy head. But when they forsake the commandments of the Torah, thou will be ready to wound them in their heel. This is just the blessing and the curse. This is like, look, if you want to choose the curse, disobey the commands, watch what happens. I've given my testimony on this, that and many people have. One of the promises that are given to us throughout the Psalms, throughout the Bible, is that the person who meditates upon the Torah day and night will be blessed. I had a phone conversation with somebody on this week. He couldn't deny that's what it says in Psalms 1. He didn't like it because he didn't want to meditate on the Torah day and night. He didn't like that it says that you will be blessed if you meditate on it. But that is not a broken promise. That is fact. You will be blessed. The idea is that if you meditate on the Torah day and night, well, the idea of night is that you're asleep. Okay, you're still meditating on it while you're asleep. Why are you meditating upon it while you're asleep? Because you did all day while you were awake. You were thinking about it. You were praying over it. You were investigating. You were reading scripture, the Torah. You were reading the commands. You were seeing how you could live your life according to them. And the promise is that if you are instructed by the Torah consciously while you're awake, while you're asleep, it will continue instructing you. And that is also a sign. The idea of sleep is the same thing as death. I have showed that before, that when people go to Sheol, the Torah will continue to instruct them. But when they fail to do it and they rebel, they are now void of the commands of righteous living. And so think of it like this. I have heard many Christians, particularly when they get into kind of more charismatic groups, Pentecostals, so on and so forth, they will tell me that clearly they don't have to keep the commands because day and night they're just fighting demons all the time. You know, they manifest and they say the name of Jesus and they flee. And that's proof that they don't need to keep the commands. They don't need to be loyal to the very person that they're calling out for. And yet they live in this world just constantly manifested with these dark entities. And I hear this a lot. And it's almost just, it validates a worldview. What I have found is I have lived my entire life and everyone is at a different place. Everyone who's listening to this, we're all at different walks in our life. Hopefully your goal is to conform more to the face of our Father. That should not be a shocking or controversial statement. For some reason it is. For some reason that is so controversial that Noel would say that our goal should be to become more righteous and walk as our shepherd walked. That's not controversial, but apparently it is. So what I found is that my entire life, I could cause demons to flee. I could invoke the name of Jesus, Jesus Christ rebukes you, that kind of stuff, and they would flee. But something happened when I started putting the commands on the doorposts of my house, as the Torah says, and I started keeping the Sabbath and eating clean. I'm telling you guys right now, those bites from the Seraphim angels, they're gone. They removed. The people are literally, I think, in this day and age, getting bit by these entities in a number of ways, and it's through their disobedience. So let's compare Genesis 3:15 with John or Yochanan chapter 3. And as Moshe lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the son of Adam be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For Allah so loved the world. I'll just read that. Let's just read the kind of King James version here. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. I have so many people, they when they hate the Torah, like they hate like everything that precedes this in the Bible, they're like, no, that I believe this. I believe in the Bible. I believe in John 3:16. Do you believe in John 3:16? They think they have me like in a trap. I'm like, yeah, I actually do. I do believe in John 3:16. They're like, aha, all you need is belief. You don't need good works. You just need belief. I'm like, well, actually, you know, I believe in John 3:16, but I'm more of a John 3:16 through 21st kind of guy. So let's like keep reading it and just see what the context is. Like belief in what? Right? I mean, that's an important question. Belief in what? So, for God sent not his son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And that's the whole goal, right? Like clearly, but we know that some people will be condemned. It's not saying that nobody's going to be condemned. He came into the world so that the world would not be condemned, but there will be people who will choose the curse. And in Christian terms, they're not going to make it to heaven. In Christian terms, they're going to go to hell because that's the blessing and the curse. Christianity believes in it as well. He that believeth on him is not condemned. Okay, so there's that belief again. But he that believeth not is condemned already. So we know now that there are people that are condemned because he had not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. There's the name again, right? Just invoking the name of Jesus. Well, and this is the condemnation that light is come into the world and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. So it's telling you right now that there are people with naughty deeds. And they don't like the light. For everyone that doeth evil hates the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds be reproved. And what is the light? We know that Torah is the light. And I could show you passages from Wisdom of Solomon where it says that those who hate the Torah, that they don't like the Torah because it shows their deeds. And they don't want to have that kind of consciousness. They don't want to believe that they are committing transgressions against the law. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. That's from John or Yochanan, chapter 3, 14 through 21. Got to read it all the way through, everyone. So here's the reason for the short season. And so there was a comment that was made earlier in the comment section. Why do these people concentrate on Moses so much? Well, when you understand that like the entire Bible is just commentary on the Torah, you got to understand the law. You got to read the law. You got to know what the law states before you can decide if the law is done away with or not, or whether you have to adhere to it. Like you have to know what it says. It's really important. So if we know that sin is a transgression of the Torah, it's kind of important to know what the Torah states, right? Well, let's read this I've read this so many times, but there's new people here. So reason for the short season, when we're talking about the millennial kingdom, the investigation on this channel that the millennial kingdom already physically manifested on this earth. The question is, why did it come to an end? That I get that question all the time. Therefore, those people were deservedly punished through such creatures and were tormented by a multitude of animals. So this is talking about the reason for the short season is the same reason that they had to go through the wilderness for 40 years. That too was a short season. Why did they go through? Because of their disobedience, because they rebelled. Instead of this punishment, you show kindness to your people, and you prepared quails to eat, a delicacy to satisfy the desires of appetite, in order that those people, when they desired food, might lose the least remnant of appetite because of the odious creature sent to them. While your people, after suffering want a short time, might partake of delicacies. Let's just skip ahead here. Because we already saw that, right? That the Ruach the bath coal is saying, look, I feed you, you just murmur, you complain. It's never good enough for you. For when the terrible rage of wild animals came upon your people, and they were being destroyed by the bites of writhing serpents, your wrath did not continue to the end, but they were troubled for a small season, that they might be admonished, having a sign of Yeshua, of salvation, to put them in remembrance of the commandment of your Torah. It's all that's the gospel, guys. That is the good news. Like the Torah is good news. It's all right there. Why was Yahushua HaMashiach, Yeshua, Jesus Christos, put up on that pole, on the cross, on the Tav? It was to put us in remembrance of the commandments of his Torah. Because if we break the Torah, if we rebel against it, the writhing bites of the serpents come. But he is the medicine, as we saw in Genesis 3 in the Targum. See how it all connects? It's amazing. Amazing how the scripture all connects. Let's see. What is this here? This is from Legends of the Jews. Let's give this a read. Talking about the same scenes, and then we'll be moving on to other stuff. Owing to the king of Edom's refusal to permit Israel to pass through his land, they were obliged at the very point when they believed themselves at the end of their march to continue it so as to go around the land of Edom. And of course, they're murmuring, they're complaining. Let's skip ahead. Then a voice sounding from the heavens became audible upon earth. This would be the Bath Kolian, the feminine voice, making this announcement: "Come hither and behold, O ye men, come hither and hearken, ye creatures of flesh. In the beginning of things, I cursed the serpent with the words, dust shalt thou eat, yet it complained not of its food." And then they say down here, the very serpents that during the 40 years march had been burned by the cloud of glory and lay heaped up high round about the camp. That's an interesting picture. These same serpents now bit the people so terribly that their poison burned the souls of those whom they attacked. So the idea is that, this is kind of describing for you, like, if we are keeping the commands and we are being obedient and not sinning, these serpents, these writhing, slithering basilisk, seraphim, demonic creatures, they can't harm us. And they are like literally getting burned up in the fire of the Ruach HaKodesh. It is only when that fire is removed, right? When we quench that fire, we kind of put out that fire that we're supposed to guard, that they can come in and they can torment us. Hopefully that makes sense. This is so here we see some basilisk. I would call them seraphim, the fiery ones. Seraphim means like the fiery serpents. But here we see depictions of them in Egypt. Good old hieroglyphs. And this is what we see on a wall. It's called a hieroglyphic hymn. It was used for the coronation the pharaoh found within the pyramids. And of course, I don't know which pyramid this was found in. I think that the Great Pyramids were the evidence is there that they were built by Seth and they were finished by Shem, by Melchizedek afterwards, and that the Egyptians actually stole this whole culture themselves as the inheritors. The doors of the horizon are open; their bolts are slipped. He comes to thee, O red crown. He comes to thee, O fiery one. There's seraph right there. So the fiery ones, the fiery dragons. He comes to you, O great one. He comes to you, O magician. O red crown. I don't know if I should even read all this cantation, but you could see there again. It talks about the O fiery ones. Describes them in magical terms. O magician, O fiery snake, seraph. So let's talk about basilisk. I would love to see this in real life. This is a beautiful wood carving from probably the late Middle Ages, describing what they looked like. Here's a few other medieval depictions of the basilisk. And again, with medieval artwork, it's always about, slaying the dragon, right? And being on your guard, taking out the bad guys. In this one here, you see a basilisk. I don't know if, my mouse should be showing right here. Interesting enough, there's a unicorn bending down to take a drink right here. I'm not sure what this guy is. There's some kind of interesting creatures in here. Another basilisk depiction. Of course, they have, sometimes they get really wacky. They make them look like roosters. Here's another basilisk. This one doesn't have any wings. They make it look like a snake. But maybe it was kind of morphing into a snake. This was like a science journal, I think more Renaissance area time. All right, so this comes from Herodotus, and this is just his writing of history. This is a great documentation into the existence of these creatures. I mean, he believed they existed. So this is what Herodotus says. There is a region, moreover, in Arabia, situated nearly over against the city of Buto, to which place I came to inquire about the winged serpent. So he goes there, he hears about it, and he wants to investigate it himself. And when I came thither, I saw bones of serpents and spines in quantity so great that it is impossible to make report of the number. And there were heaps of spines, some heaps large and others less large, and others smaller still than these. And these heaps were many in number. This region in which the spines are scattered upon the ground is the nature of an entrance from a narrow mountain pass to a great plain, which plain adjoins the plain of Egypt. It seemed like a lot of these stories, they all lived in that area of Egypt. And this is how he describes it. The form of the serpent is like that of the water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and as like as possible to the wings of a bat. So Herodotus, I mean, you know, he was either pranked majorly. I don't think he was. I think he literally went to investigate this. And he talked about just, he couldn't even count the number. There was hundreds of them piled up, and he could see the vertebrae. He could see, okay, this is like a snake creature, and look, it has wings. And they're in Egypt. In another account, another historian, I wish I found it for this presentation. They talked about how they would be up in the spice trees in Egypt, and they would have to like take these like brooms or something and knock them out. But they would come into the trees. Some people have speculated that the pterodactyl or some form of it, like little tiny guys, could have been them. I don't really know. Wasn't there. Yasher 72 talks about them too. They show up in there. And Balaam, the son of Beor, when the king of Cush had left him to guard the city and the poor of the city, he rose up and advised with the people of the land to rebel against King Kikianus. Now, referring you back to the vision of the Watchers, the duality of the good and the evil, it's the same thing with Moses. I want to do a whole presentation on this sometime, and just showing how it was the same with Paul and Simon Magus, but Moses has his duality, and it's Balaam. And they were always, their whole lives were just butting heads going against each other. So Balaam goes and he takes over the city, and the people of the land hearkened to him, and they swore to him and made him king over them. And his two sons were captains of the army. His two sons were the wizards who went up against Moses during the Exodus. So they rose up and raised the walls of the city at the two corners, and they built an exceeding strong building. And at the third corner, they dug ditches without number between the city and the river, which surrounds the whole land of Cush. And they made the waters of the river burst forth there. At the fourth corner, they collected numerous serpents by their incantations and enchantments. So it kind of like what we saw in Egypt, the idea of invoking these creatures. It seems to be the case that they were able, there's some sort of spiritual connection with them. And they fortified the city and they dwelt therein. Now let's finish the story. So Moshe is having to go take this city. And this is before he goes and frees the people in Egypt. So this is in those middle intervening years. And there's all these creatures, these serpents. They haven't really described them yet. They will. But look what it says. Moses said unto them, pass through and proclaim a voice in the whole camp unto all the people, saying, thus says the king, go into the forest and bring with you of the young ones of the stork, each man a young one in his hand. So they go off and they collect all these storks. And that's what happens. And they took each man his young one in his hand, and they went away. So when they came to the place of the serpents that Balaam had planted around this city, the king said to them, send forth each man his young stork upon the serpents. And they sent forth each man his young stork at the king's orders. And the young storks ran upon the serpents, and they devoured them all and destroyed them out of that place. Yasher 73. So I had to put Raiders of the Lost Ark in here again. But this is the stork, a picture of the stork that it's talking about here. And we see the Egyptian god Thoth. And he, too, is depicted like an ibis. So the stork is a type of ibis. And historically, this is the accounts we see of that these birds would be the one that they would eat the basilisk. So Josephus, he gives a really interesting depiction. Now, keep in mind, people talk about how Jasher is a medieval forgery. It's really interesting how Josephus is sourcing this ancient text, and happens to match Jasher a lot. So that's just something to consider right there. This is how Josephus describes the scene with Moses against Balaam. But Moses prevented the enemies and took and led his army before those enemies were appraised of his attacking them, for he did not march by the river, but by land, where he gave a wonderful demonstration of his sagacity. For when the ground was difficult to be passed over because of the multitude of serpents, he just says that some of which ascend out of the ground unseen, and also they fly in the air. So right there we know that they're not just snakes. These serpents have wings, and also they fly in the air, and so came upon men unawares and do them mischief. That's kind of a freaky. I mean, I already don't like snakes, but the thought of a snake coming up out of the ground and flying through the air unaware and just like coming up from behind me to strike me, like that's enough to like no thank you. All the better a reason to keep the commands, everyone. Which animal is the greatest enemy to serpents imaginable? Is the ibis. He calls it. It says here the ibis or whatever, but it's ibis. It says the ibis is the greatest enemy to the serpents imaginable, for they fly from them when they come near them, and as they fly, they are caught and devoured by them. Okay, so this is saying that these serpents are flying away from these birds, and the birds will fly after them and catch them. Pliny the Elder says this: the Egyptians also invoked their ibis against the incursions of serpents. So here we have multiple historians. We have Josephus, we have Pliny the Elder, we have Yasher, all in agreement, and Herodotus as well. And the people of Elis, their god, Miagros, when the vast multitudes of, flies, whatever. But he says here that the ibis would go down and hunt down this the serpent, and here we see it here. Gold, this is probably what it looked like, right? Now, Herodotus said it had like bat wings without feathers. This kind of looks a little feathery to me. Don't really know. This comes from a young earth creationist site, Genesis Park. This is what they say. I was trying to I'm only quoting from this because I was trying to find their source. I wasn't able to, so I'm just taking their word for it. The Assyrian monarch, Esarhaddon, recounts how he marched south into the desert, quote, where serpents and scorpions cover the plain like ants. No, thank you. And he recorded seeing yellow serpents that could fly as he marched to fight against Tirhaka, king of Egypt and Nubia. So there again, the ancients, they talked about in Egypt. So when we see all these emblems in Egypt, they weren't just making this up. This was something that wasn't just esoteric. It was actually an exoteric reality. But again, we're seeing the connection in numbers, that these are seraphim angels that somehow are inhabiting a material form on the earth. There's something to think about right there. So Isaiah, of course, talks about the seraphim angel. That's what he says in chapter 6 of Yeshayahu. Hold on, I need a little bit more coffee here. And then I'll be upset at myself later because I won't go to sleep tonight. In the year that King Uzziyahu died, I saw also Yahweh sitting upon a throne. That's an exciting vision to have right there. High and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it, his train that filled the temple, stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he did fly. Now, this is a really beautiful scene. Apparently, maybe the good seraphim up in heaven have more wings. Maybe they lost wings down here. I don't really know. This has been highly commented upon, that these seraphim angels' idea is that they're covering their body and their face and their feet and everything with these wings, and they're just trying to like stay in the presence of Yahweh there. So in Isaiah 36, we see taken from the Masoretic and also the Aramaic Targum, it says this: the burden of the beast of the Negev into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and old lion, the viper and fiery flying serpent. So he does talk about a fiery flying serpent, and the Targum defines it as the flying basilisk. So there you have, again, in the Bible, your basilisk that apparently never existed according to the official narrative, though the ancient historians all said that they did. So Satan and the flood. I'm not talking about Noah's flood. I'm just talking about a generic flood, maybe the mud flood. I don't really know. But we read this in Revelation. And the serpent casts out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. Now, is this talking just purely, sappy Hallmark metaphorical? I'm going to show you an account in scripture where this actually did happen. We're talking about, of course, the devil, Satan, Hasatan, the dragon, the Seraphim angel. He casts out water from his mouth. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. That's, of course, a very popular passage, Revelation chapter 12. So this is what happened to Abraham. I'm going to quote to you from two separate books, one from Jasher and the other from Writings of Abraham. And this is when Abraham is on his way with Yitzchak, his son, Isaac, for the sacrifice. This is what we read. And Satan keeps appearing to Abraham in different manners. I will say this really quickly, that it's interesting that when Abraham is going on his way to, of course, we know he didn't sacrifice his son, but so you know what I mean, when he's on his way to sacrifice his son, and Satan keeps appearing as like an old man and different things like that, and keeps trying to stop him. And time and again, Abraham could have let Satan stop him, but he kept recognizing, like, wait a second, this isn't something wrong about this. Like, I don't really know who this is, but this is not, he's not supposed to be here. And he kept pushing forward. And there every single time, I kid you not, that I have put on a baptism event with the Unexpected Cosmology, and like the elders and other people did baptisms, there are always people who want to come out and be baptized, and they say how important this is, and it is. And then they start texting me or calling me in advance with excuses as to things that cropped up, like freak things that they're like, well, I can't come out now. I'm like, and I'm thinking in my mind of Abraham and Yitzchak. I'm like, is it possible that maybe Satan is trying to stop you from, and they listen and they don't come out and get baptized. But anyways, Abraham, he's rebuking Satan, and Satan went from them. And seeing that he could not prevail over them, he hid himself from them, Satan did, and he went and passed before them in the road, and he transformed himself to a large brook of water in the road. That's creepy. Like there's an actual, Satan actually disguises himself as water, as a river. When was the last time you ever crossed a river and thought, I wonder if this is a spiritual entity? And Abraham said to his son Yitzchak, I know this place in which there was no brook nor water. Now, therefore, it is this Satan who does all this to us. And he's recognizing that he doesn't say here that the brook is Satan, but he knows that the brook is put there by Satan. Anyways, we read, and Satan was terrified at the voice of Abraham, and he went away from them, and the place again became dry land as it was at first, and they were able to cross. I skipped over here. He rebukes Satan. Here's the same scene we see played out in the writings of Abraham. A lot of people don't like the writings of Abraham. This book continually perplexes me, how amazing it is, how we see connections with this in the Dead Sea Scrolls that wouldn't be discovered for another 100 years, connections with Jasher, which hadn't even been dissected by scholars at this point. Just a very, very interesting read. So here's a connection to Jasher. Same story. This is Abraham giving the story. As we continued on our journey, we entered a narrow ravine with high walls. And when we were in the midst of it, we heard a mighty rumbling, and the earth shook beneath our feet. Looking back, we saw a great wall of water coming down upon us, bearing trees and boulders in a mighty flood. So this is much more dramatic than Jasher. I mean, this is like, you can imagine this, like you're going through a narrow canyon, you hear the rumbling, you look, you see this whole body of water coming, and it's bringing rocks and trees with it. You're like, oh crap, we're about to die. My heart was moved within me for my son Yitzhak, and he sought also to protect me, which is a beautiful picture that his son is like, he's not trying to save himself. He's like, Dad, we got to get you out of here. And he says, thus did Satan seek to destroy us, that we might no offer an acceptable sacrifice unto Yahuwah, our Elohim. But the power of our Elohim is mightier than that of Satan, wherefore Satan can do no harm until the children of men, except Yahuwah Elohim, allow him to do it. So we see a connection there with Revelation, where the dragon is literally spewing out water to try to destroy the woman. Speaking of which, let's talk about the binding of Satan. A lot of in the kind of this millennial kingdom Tartaria talk, a lot of people are talking about the 1,000 years of Satan being bound. What they don't always realize is that there is a historical tradition that Satan can be bound many times, not just once. So let's look at the binding of Satan. Of course, this is a picture here of assumedly Michael binding the dragon, Satan, the Seraphim creature. Revelation 20 does say this. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand, and he laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, telling us it's the same creature that tempted Adam and Eve, who was the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things, he must be released for a little while, for a short season. And that ties us in with the wilderness generation of the Exodus, and the little season that they had to go through because of their murmurings and their disobedience and the rebellion against the Torah. So this is what it says in Jubilees chapter 40, or Yohalim. And the land of Mitzrayim, that's in Egypt, was at peace before Pharaoh because of Yosef. Well, what does that look like, that Egypt was at peace? It says, and there was no Satan and no evil person therein. Okay. So, of course, there's many Satans, right? So all the Satans are removed. They are bound and removed from Egypt, which is a depiction, a picture of the millennial kingdom right there under Yosef as a kind of a prototype Messiah. And it says this in Jubilees, just 6 chapters up, 46. And there was no Satan nor any evil all the days of the life of Yosef. Once again, 2 more chapters forward, Jubilees 48 says this. And on the 14th day, and on the 15th, and on the 16th, and on the 17th, and on the 18th, the prince Mastema, of course, is Belial, was bound and imprisoned behind the children of Yasharel, that he might not accuse them. Okay, so we know that he was he was bound and not allowed in Egypt during Yosef, but now this is talking about Moses. He's actually literally bound and in prison. They put the shackles on Ha-Satan behind the children of Yasharel, that he might not accuse them. And on the 19th, we let them loose, that they might help the Mitzrayim and pursue the children of Yasharel. So Satan is then released. He's bound and then he's released, that he might pursue. You saw the footage in the beginning with the Red Sea. He pursued Israel to the Red Sea. So here are some depictions of Michael. These are more, of course, a Renaissance. I should have probably put in some more late Middle Ages artwork in here, but I love this scene. I'm actually, he might not be binding Satan here. He might be releasing some people from Sheol. This one here, I mean, I love this artwork. Just looking at it, I find it very comforting, and just watching Michael just throw the beat down there on Satan, binding him in chains. There's that Renaissance artwork I was telling you about, where they lost the dragon form to them. You still see little elements of it. And yet more and more, I could have just put pages of this stuff up here. And there's Mont Saint Michel. I was talking to my group beforehand, before I went live, about Mont Saint Michel. Is one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life that I will always remember. And that's where like it got real. Like when I went there with my family several years ago, when we were living in France for a short time, we were in Europe for like 6 months, and went to Mont Saint Michel, and I remember the first time I saw like a gargoyle, we went through the draw gate, and it was just mind blowing. And to learn that, of course, this was dedicated to Michael, and they treat it like it was the cult of Saint Michael. This was a huge pilgrimage site through the Middle Ages. We know that. And apparently, according to some, not everybody, according to some, that this was the site that they built this here because this was the site where Michael actually bound Satan. And they were basically in a battle over Britain. They went across the water and they came over to Normandy, over there to France. And that's where he finally captured him right here on this spot and dropped him in the abyss. And that's why they built Mont Saint Michel here. So, all right, let's talk about Mummified, the mummified dragon of India. I've talked about this a few times. This really excites me. What do you see here? This is, by the way, this is identified as a dinosaur, as a theropod. A theropod is the idea that they were supposed to stand on their hind legs, which they probably did. But if you look at this here, this is an actual fleshy. This is not a fossil. This is a mummy of a dragon that was found in India. I'll give you a little story on this. But what does this look like to you? This looks like the Chinese dragons. You know how they're all like in these like slithering kind of humps, like serpentine creatures. And I think those depictions are probably more legitimate than anything else. I'll quote an episode of Mr. Rogers I was watching with my daughter about a year ago, and it was from the 70s. Mr. Rogers goes to this fossil dinosaur museum, and this is back when the anthropologist could actually say this. He's talking to this woman there, the museum curator, and he's asking her, I think, like questions about what they look like and whether they were warm and cold-blooded. And she actually answers she's like, nobody knows. We don't really know. We don't know what they actually look like. I'm like, yes. They can't say that anymore. Now they have it all figured out, right? They know how they evolved and everything and how they were killed out, all this kind of stuff. But like they actually don't know. And they're taking these bones. Now, a lot of people in this group are, investigating whether dinosaurs existed or not. I think that they did. I will give you a little reason as to why I think that they were legitimate creatures. Here's one right here. So this is has been identified as the Deinonychus. Now, this was a story that dropped in 2017. I remember when this dropped, December 2017. I remember where I was in California when I saw this, traveling through California. And when this came up in the news, I said, if this is legitimate, it's going to be dropped within a week. You're never going to hear about this again. And it is. It's buried. It never came up again. The story is that, and this is, of course, that you could see the bone recreation here, and it looks very different than the way this really looks here. This looks like it looks like a dragon. You could see this running along the branches of a tree and climbing up a tree, that kind of stuff, slithering around it. The story is that this partially preserved corpse was discovered by an electrician cleaning out a substation that had been left untouched for 35 years in Jasper, a small city in India. So he goes down there. He's like trying to, they're refurbish, right? They're probably putting up some strip mall or something like that. And he goes down there and he discovers this. And it says it resembles a small dinosaur, but since flightless dinosaurs have been extinct for 65 million years, scientists have struggled to identify it. And the creature has now been sent for an analysis, including carbon dating, which will reveal its age. And again, I can't find any more follow-ups on this. I think they discovered that this was very recent, 1,000, 2,000 years old, and they're like, oops, let's just bury this and put this in a back room and maybe send it on a boat to the Smithsonian. And oh no, the boat went down in the water, something like that. I was going to show you guys the video because you can actually, so look up this story and you could see in real time, they show like all these Indian villagers, these little children and adults. They're looking at this thing. They're all talking and gasping, and the camera's going around, and it shows. I mean, it's very clearly this is legitimate. It's not fake. You can see the teeth, the eyes, everything. Very well preserved. And this is what Credo Mutwa says. He talks a lot about the reptilians. Fascinating stuff. I didn't have time to cover it last week. But he says, this is part of his interview with Nexus magazine. This is what he says. And by the way, Credo, he's into some really dark stuff. Okay, so this is like a shaman in Africa that I'm not, recommending the guy's spirituality. but he has nonetheless, he's kind of like, he has all the stories of shamanism and their histories and how the reptilians, the serpentine reptilians, ruled over them, how they came down in the incursion, the watchers. He says, all over Africa, there is overwhelming evidence that once there were gigantic human beings who walked this planet. Yes, this is the 70s people, so he's a globe earth guy. In the days of the dinosaur, there are footprints in granite, each one 6 foot long by 3½ wide. Footprints of mature human beings, sir, which date back thousands of years, millions of years. We can, cut through some of that, but this is what I want you to see. And this is really bizarre when you read this quote. I think he's onto something here. And he says, where did these giants go to? Who knows? The dinosaurs may have produced an intelligent race. Like, what? A race which deceives us into thinking that it comes from the stars, when in fact it is part of this planet on which we live. So here he's accrediting the race of dinosaurs to intelligent beings. Now, this is, going to sound retarded, I guess. I mean, if, you go to a museum and you ask the curator there about this and be like, no, they didn't talk a language, dude. They were just, lizards, but, or whatever they were, right? Bird-like reptiles or whatever. But what he's saying here, I kind of think there's some legitimacy to this. What if all these fossils were actually saying that they were actually a race of because I've already shown you this with the basilisk, that they are accredited somehow being attached to the Seraphim angels. What if these fossils were a race of highly intelligent reptilian creatures that they are still telling us their story today? Maybe they've been released from the abyss, and there's this big fascination with the dinosaurs because that's actually who they were. Just, they were the original kind of reptilian dragon overlords. Just something to think about. Now, this came from Canada, came from a coal mine. It was discovered not long ago. It's called the Mummified Dragon of Canada. I think it's Alberta. It's a notosaur. This thing is just wild. I would love to see this in person. And I mean, what does that look like to you? This is apparently a perfectly preserved, almost perfectly. It's not perfect, but you can see the skin and everything. I mean, is this a big fat hoax? Did someone carve this, or did they really pull this out of the ground? It looks like a dragon, guys. I mean, how much evidence do you need to see that these dinosaurs were literally dragons? This is why I kind of pull away from saying that they're all hoax. I think that they're telling us our serpentine Seraphim overlords are telling us their own story, that they were destroyed. They ruled over mankind, and this was them. Here's another interesting little thing I found while researching this for you guys. Origins of the Frog Prince or Princess. Did anyone see the movie? Was it the Frog Prince, the Disney one? Of course, the Brothers Grimm. They collected the stories of the prince who needed to be. He was a frog. He needed to be kissed. And then you see in Russian culture, they had one on the Frog Princess, which you can see over here on the left. But this account comes from the travels of Sir John Mandeville, which predates the Brothers Grimm and all this kind of stuff. And I was, I'll let you guys decide whether this is legitimate or not. All right. I'm just reporting this to you. Some of this stuff, we need a little bit more, maybe a little salt shaker with us. But this is what he says. He talks about Ephesus. He's giving like a tour of the whole Mediterranean world at this time. He says, and from Ephesus, men go through many isles in the sea and to the city of Patara, where St. Nicholas was born, and so to Martha, where he was chosen to be bishop, and he goes on from there. All right. And then pass men through the isles of Kokos and of Lango, of the which isles Epocras was lord of. And some men say that in the Isle of Lango is yet the daughter of this individual, this king. This king died a long time ago, but his daughter is still alive, apparently, at the time that this book is written, in form and likeness of a great dragon that is 100 fathom of length, as men say, for I have not seen her. And they of the isles call her Lady of the Land. And she lies in an old castle in a cave, and shows twice or thrice in the year, and she does no harm to no man, but if men do her harm, and she was thus changed and transformed from a fair damsel into the likeness of a dragon by a goddess that was called Diana. That's really interesting. He's giving credence to this goddess Diana, who transformed, put this curse on this girl, this princess. And men say that she will so endure in that form of a dragon until the time that a knight come that is so hardy that dare come to her and kiss her on the mouth. And then will she turn again to her own kind and be a woman again. But after that, she will not live long. Meaning that, she will return to her mortal state and she'll grow old and die. Now, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reading to you this medieval text, all right? I've been kind of editing this book, working on it and discovering all sorts of stuff in there. And it is not long since that time that a knight of Rhodes that was hardy and doughty in arms said that he would kiss her. And when he was upon her, his courser, and went to the castle and entered the cave, the dragon lifted her head against him. And when the knight saw her in that form, so hideous and so horrible, he fled away. And the dragon bore the knight upon a rock. And from that rock, she cast him into the sea. And so was lost both horse and man. So apparently, I don't know. Like, she doesn't do you any harm unless you're terrified of her and run, and then she'll kill you. But, give her a kiss on the lips, right? See what happens. Well, they go on and says, and also a young man that was not of the dragon went out of a ship and went through the isle till he came to the castle and came into the cave and went so long till that he found a chamber. And there he saw a damsel that combed her head and looked into a mirror. This is actually the lady who's a dragon, but she looks like a mortal woman. And she had much treasure about her, of course, because that's what dragons have, right? Treasure around them. And he supposed that she had been a common woman that dwelled there to receive men to folly, meaning a common woman like a prostitute, that he thinks she's a siren. And he abode until the damsel saw his shadow in the mirror. And she turned toward him and asked him what he would do. And he said he would be her sweetheart or paramour. And she, keep in mind, this is like kind of like a French guy writing this. And she asked him if he was a knight. And he said, nay, he's not a knight. And then she said that he might not be her sweetheart. But she bade him to go again unto his fellows that they might make him a knight. And long story short, she says, become a knight, come back, give me a kiss. I'll be your paramour. And he never does. He never comes back. And so he ends it, the travels of Sir John Mandeville, claiming that this lady dragon still is in existence. I'll let you guys decide that. Here's some actually really interesting accounts, Dragons of the Wasteland. And this comes from the Acts of Andrew. I'm going to be reading to you from the Acts of John, the Acts of Andrew. I have these published in the further Acts of the Apostles that follows all of them. And they encounter in a lot of these extra biblical New Testament scripture, they encounter dragons. But once again, these dragons are, in no uncertain term, these are not just physical, like dinosaur like creatures like we would see in Jurassic Park. These are actual seraphim angelic creatures. So let's see what it says right here. After this, a youth who followed the apostles sent for his mother to meet Andre. That would be Andrew. She came, and after being instructed, begged him to come to their house, which was devastated by a great serpent. So there's a physicality to this. There is an actual dragon that is tormenting this family. As Andre approached, it hissed loudly, and with raised head came to meet him. It was 50 cubits long. I'll let you do the math on that. Everyone fell down in fear. And Andre said, hide thy head, foul one, which thou did raise in the beginning for the hurt of mankind. So here he is accrediting that this dragon was there in the beginning, hurting mankind, and obey the servants of Allahayam and die. The serpent roared and coiled about a great oak nearby and vomited poison and blood and died. Andre went to the woman's farm where a child killed by the serpent lay dead. And he said to the parents, our Elohim or our Allahayam, who would have you saved, have sent me here that you may believe on him. Go and see the slayer slain. And they said, we care not so much for the child's death, if we be avenged. They went, and Andre said to the wife, go and raise the boy. She went, and nothing doubting, and said, in the name of my Elohim, Yahushua HaMashiach, rise up whole. And the parents returned and found their child alive, and they fell at Andre's feet. So this dragon killed the boy, was able to resurrect him, killed the serpent. And again, he's a spiritual entity. Here we see another account. This comes from the Acts of Thomas, Acts of Theom. Of course, Thomas went to the ends of the earth, to India. Could have been China. In the ancient term, India just meant the Far East. It wasn't a country back then. And I'll talk more about that some other time. This is what we read. And when he had so said, a great black serpent came out of a hole, beating with his head and shaking his tail upon the ground. Now they have a bit of a conversation. He asks him to, tell me what you are. And this is what the dragon says to him. I am a reptile of the reptile nature and nauseous son of the nauseous father of him that hurt and smote the four brethren which stood upright. All right. I am son to him that sits on a throne over all the earth, that receives back his own from them that borrow. I am son to him that girds about the sphere. I am kin to him that is outside the ocean, whose tail is set in his own mouth. I am he that entered through the barrier into paradise and spoke with Chahwaha the things which my father bade me speak unto her. I am he that kindled and inflamed Cain to kill his own brother, and on him account did thorns and thistles grow upon in the earth. I am he that cast down the angels from above and bound them in lust after women, that children born of earth might come of them, and I might work my will in them. It's interesting that this entity who claims to be the Satan we know actually claims to be the son of another creature. And that's not the first time I've read that. I am he that inhabits and holds the deep of Tartarus. There's your Tartary right there. That's the Acts of Theom 31 through 33. We see yet another example in again in Acts of Theom. And it fell out one day that as I came out from the bath, there met me a man troubled and disturbed, and his voice and speech seemed to me exceeding faint and dim. And he stood before me and said, I and you will be in one love, and we will have intercourse together as man with his wife. And I answered and said to him, okay, so this is a woman speaking here. This is not Thomas. And I answered and said to him, I never had to do with my betrothed, for I refuse to marry, and how shall I yield myself to thee that would have intercourse with me in adulterous wise? And having said so, I passed on, and I said to my handmaid that was with me, saw you that youth and his shamelessness, how boldly he spoke with me and had no shame? But she said to me, I saw an old man speaking to thee. It's kind of creepy. So she thinks he's a young man. Her companion sees an old man. This person comes in and it says he came therefore that night and was joined unto me in his foul intercourse. So he's like a incubus, succubus kind of creature having intercourse with her. But then we see this, oh, the wickedness that creeps like a serpent, and that is of his kindred. And when the apostle said this, the malicious one came and stood before him, no man seeing him save the woman and the apostle. So right here, he's actually crediting him. We already saw a dragon creature, and now they're saying that this spiritual entity that appeared as a young man versus old man and embedded with her was a serpent, a dragon creature. The Acts of Thomas 43 through 44. Now, speaking of the wilderness, the idea is these spiritual entities, these dragons, live in the wilderness for a reason. We see this played out with the Azazel goat in Leviticus, or Yachira'ah 16. And on the Day of Atonement, of course, is the holiest day of the year, in which the high priest sprinkles the blood on the mercy seat. And he, of course, kills the Yahweh goats. The Azazel goat gets set free. The Azazel goat goes into the wilderness where he has no Sabbath rest, no shalom. He's always wandering. This is one, you can only conform into the image of Yahweh or Azazel. Pretty much. I mean, that's the way it works. And Yahushua HaMashiach or Barabbas, right? The idea, and I show you right here, Barabbas, the idea was that he was, of course, the Azazel goat, right? And basically the Jews there put, they credited themselves to Azazel and, let his blood be on us and that kind of stuff. So we see this here that Azazel represent. Of course, we know Azazel is the actual one of the Watchers, right? He is Hasatan, and he goes about wandering the wilderness because he's never at rest. He never has that Sabbath rest. And this is what we read in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. Now, when the Satan goes out of a man, he walks by difficult places seeking rest, and he does not find it. This is one of the reasons why we find so many dragons out in the wilderness. Now, here's a story of Messiah as a child. There's, of course, a painting of Joseph leading a donkey. This comes from the infancy gospel of Matthew. Now, just so you know, some of the early church fathers actually accredited the writer of the infancy gospel of Matthew to be the same writer as Matthew, meaning the Matthew. This comes from some of the early church fathers. They believe that this was written by the same Matthew. It just wasn't as popular of a book. This is what they say. And having come to a certain cave and wishing to rest in it, the blessed Miriam dismounted from her beast and sat down with the child Yahusha in her bosom. And there were with Joseph 3 boys, and with Miriam a girl going on the journey along with them. And lo, suddenly there came forth from the cave many dragons. Again, they're on the road to Egypt, right? So they're out there in the wilderness. And when the children saw them, they cried out in great terror. Then Yahusha went down from the bosom of his mother and stood on his feet before the dragons, and they adored Yahusha, and thereafter retired. In Revelation, of course, we know that when Babel was fallen, of course, I believe Babylon is Jerusalem. Speaking of 70 AD, it says, Babel is the great has fallen and has become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul ruach or spirit. Now, it doesn't say dragons right there, but I'm making the case that that's the same thing. These devils are these spiritual creatures that inhabit because, of course, the commands are not being kept there. They have control. So, again, referring back to the travels of Sir John Mandeville, he says the same thing. He says, and understand that the Babylon that I have spoken of, where that the Sultan dwells, is not the great Babylon where the diversity of languages was first made for vengeance by the miracle of God when the great Tower of Babel was begun to be made. So he's describing a lesser Babylon, I think, which is Egypt in this case, and he's saying, like, it's not the same, Tower of Babel location. But speaking of the Tower of Babel, he says, the walls were 64 furlongs of height. That is in the great desert of Arabia. But he says, it is all desert and full of dragons and great serpents and full of diverse venomous beasts all about. That tower with the city was of 25 miles in circuit of the walls. And he says that not many people go out that way because of all the dragons that live out there. Kind of interesting. So we see the same thing in Jeremiah. The sea has come up upon Babel. She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. Her cities are a desolation, a dry land, and a wilderness, a land where no man dwells, neither does any son of Adam pass thereby. Okay, so he doesn't talk about dragons in that account, but neither does Zephaniah here. He says beast, but we read this. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How has she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Everyone that passes by her shall hiss and wag his hand. That's from Zephaniah 2:15. Baruch describes devils and habitation by devils. So it's really interesting in these places, these ruinous places. These Bible writers are putting forward that these evil spirits live there. Really interesting. Take a good heart, O Jerusalem, for he that gave you that name will comfort you. Miserable are they that afflicted you and rejoice at your fall. Miserable are the cities which your children served. Miserable is she that received your sons. For as she rejoiced at your ruin and was glad of your fall, so shall she be grieved for her own desolation. For I will take away the rejoicing of her great multitude, and her pride shall be turned into mourning. For a fire shall come upon her from the everlasting, long to endure, and she shall be inhabited of devils for a great time. Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu 27:22 in the LXX, that would be the Greek Septuagint, says, interestingly enough, it says, For they shall be ashamed, for it is a land of graven images, and in the islands where they boasted. Therefore shall idols dwell in the islands, and the young of monsters shall dwell in it. It shall not be inhabited any more forever, as Elohim overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, so it will be overthrown there. But of course, it says the young of monsters will live there. Here's a dragon-like creature that could be found at the gate of Babylon. And I just thought about this. Oh my goodness. In Bel and the Dragon, I mean, it gives the story of Daniel actually killing. He's thrown in the arena with an actual dragon that he goes and kills. He gives him like a ball of poison or something like that and puts in his mouth. Jeremiah says in 49:3, and Chatzor shall be a dwelling for dragons and a desolation forever. So there you have it. In 51:37, he says Babel shall become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons. Isaiah 34 in the Masoretic says, the wild beast of the desert shall also meet with the wild beast of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screeched owl shall rest there and find for herself a place of rest. Now, this, interestingly enough, that most will define this as a screech owl. They don't really know what to do with this. The same account says, it says dryads shall dwell there. That's kind of interesting. It says, and demons each shall sport with its companion. Verily, dryads shall dwell there. So here we see an interesting picture of a satyr and dryads. So you see the I guess the fawn creature, right? The Pan creature who we can attribute to Ham originally, and these tree spirits. And what do we see happening? We see an old ruin, like a Roman ruin, and this guy is going out and being taught by them. So the case I want to make is that with the collapse of the millennial kingdom, what we see in artwork, what we see the presidents being warned about in scripture is to not go out to these waste places and learn from the spirits. We're going to actually see how that happened with the Watchers as well. Of course, here we see a fawn-like creature. In all these cases, it's these spiritual entities that live out in the ruins and in the woods, and these human mortals are going out and, taking part in very naughty behavior with them. For sake of time, I'm not going to talk about Lilith tonight. I'll be covering her later. The satyr and Lilith. I'll just skip all this. I just don't have time for it tonight, and I've talked about her in the past. I'm going to be closing on this tonight. Let's talk about Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, the Temple of the Watchers, and some amazing stuff has been discovered here, and they're still, I think they're still digging it out and discovering it. So this is the reason I'm showing you this. This is pre-Diluvian. This blows away official history. I mean, they're showing that. They're calling this like a pre-pottery site. Like they apparently didn't have pottery yet, but this is blowing everything we know about caveman culture, I guess. Right? I mean, we're very advanced back then. They weren't supposed to be. Let's put it that way. And this is what we read in Jubilees, chapter 8. In the 29th Jubilee, in the first week, in the beginning thereof, Arpachshad took to himself to a woman. Her name was Rasuiah, the daughter of Shushan, the daughter of Elam, and she bore him a son in the third year in this week, and he called his name Canaan. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. So this is, of course, after Noah's flood, and they're going around, and all the descendants are claiming land for themselves that they might be, the patriarch of that society. And this is really interesting. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock, right? Just kind of like this right here in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. So this would have been, he finds this civilization in ruins that had, survived the flood. And he read what was thereon, and he transcribed it and sinned owing to it, for it contained the teaching of the Watchers in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and moon and stars and all the signs of heaven. And he wrote it down and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. So what's happening is he's discovering a site just like this. He's learning about it in the Wastelands, and he's not telling Noah about it. And so now we're seeing the religion of the Watchers creeping back into society again, right? So this is what we're warned about all throughout Scripture, about going into these wastelands and learning these things. And I'm just going to end with some pictures of what I think is Gothic architecture. Well, it is Gothic architecture, but from the Millennial Kingdom. This right here, I haven't been to this location, but I have. Is this Venice, Italy? I'm not sure, because it looks like Venice, but I don't recognize that place. Whatever, it's beautiful nonetheless. This is what we read in Zechariah 13:2. We'll end on this note tonight. And it shall come to pass in that day, says Yahuwah HaSebaoth, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and they shall no more be remembered. And also I will cause the prophets and the unclean spirits to pass out of the land. So that was here's like a really weird scene where like some sort of demonic, he's got like a face on his butt. I just noticed that he's got eyes in the mouth, and that's really creepy. But he's apparently teaching this priest, he's opening a book and showing him stuff. So it's whatever naughty is going on. But that's the whole idea. And it's interesting too that we've been fed these in fairy tales of these moats around castles that apparently kept the dragons out, right? It's kind of like a fun little children's fairy tale, but I'm of the impression that this water was living water, and that it was in fact used to keep spiritual entities out, the real dragons. And so that was the promise. This is why I read you from Jubilees, where it said that during the days of Joseph, which was a example of the millennial kingdom to come, that all of the evil spirits were cast out of Egypt and they lived in harmony, which is an exciting thought. So the same thing would have happened during the millennial kingdom, in which, Satan was thrown in the abyss. The Watchers were still down there. All the unclean spirits were removed. Maybe they were put out into the wasteland. We don't really know where they all went. They were outside of the borders of the kingdom. And, maybe mankind started going out there and learning from them. That's when the occult started coming up, and the Enlightenment, they start, bringing it out in the artwork, and the rest is history. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and we're right at a good time to quit. We'll do this again next week. Good night, everybody. Have a good, restful Sabbath, or, of course, happy work week whenever you watch this video.
If you had the power to go back in time and choose to give into a ministry that would effectively change the way the world sees an idea, would you do it? I think the answer is yes. Well, you don't have to go back in time. What you can do is right now, you can click the link below and give to the Paleo-Hebrew translation effort. What is this? Well, Paleo-Hebrew is the ancient form of Hebrew. When you write Hebrew out, you build it. If I said H2O, you know that I mean water. That's what building a language is. Japanese, Chinese, Korean, they all have this idea, even Paleo Babylonian, the Paleo-Egyptian, the hieroglyphics, petroglyphs. They have this idea that when you put a certain group of pictures together, it means a word. That's what Paleo-Hebrew was. That's what Paleo-Hebrew is. Pamela Glasgow is changing the way that we view the scriptures. You can help. You can go ahead and click the link below and find out how you can change your life, your study of the Bible, your children's life, your children's children, and everybody the whole world, man, the whole world can benefit greatly from this. And you can have the power to help right now. All you got to do is click it and give. And it's good to give. What does the Bible say? James says, what is good religion? That I defile not myself with the world, then I give to the widows and the orphans. Well, we're working on number one. Sorry, number two. Well, both, actually. We're working on not defiling ourselves, so hopefully you're working on that too. I'm working on that. But we can give to the widows. And the widows, she's right there. And she's doing a work for you, for us, for the whole world. And we have the power to effectively change the paradigm of how we've seen the scriptures from time immemorial to tomorrow. So do that. All right, be blessed and not stressed.